So welcome back, everybody, and to Food and Nutritional Health. And today we're going to be looking at carbohydrates, okay, particularly simple carbohydrates. And if you look at the picture over here, you will see pasta, you see, different kinds of grains, but also at the same time, you see, Coke, and you see a lot of empty calories. And so kind of try to keep in mind on what food types, contain carbohydrate. They are almost all times plant-based food with the exception of dairy products. And they can also contain sweet foods, okay, because sugars are a type of carbohydrate, and also starchy food because they are also a type of carbohydrate. And fibrous food, they also contain carbohydrate, and there are a lot of important nutritional issues pertaining to carbohydrate. And a lot of that have to do with the concentration and the sheer amount of some of this carbohydrate. So basically, oh, sorry. Okay. So let's start off with a fake, whether is it fake or fact. And a lot of times, people always say that carbohydrates, are fattening and should be avoided. But that is fake because not all carbs are created equally. And some carbohydrates supply fewer calories than your fats and oils. So take, for example, your fiber-rich food, your fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and they do have significant health benefits. And so that's why we do have this love-hate relationship with carbs, but you cannot avoid carbs. We still need to have carbs in our diet. And so basically carbohydrates are made up, a large class of nutrients, and they can consist of your starch, your sugar, and also your fibers. And they are generally present in a lot of different types of food, okay? And the body primarily uses this as a source of energy. Also, we kind of use, and a little bit more on the functions later, but they're also kind of used for structural components, and it's not just only your protein. And a lot of times we're kind of taught that, carbohydrate makes you fat, it helps you gain weight, but like I mentioned, there are different kinds of carbohydrate, with the healthiest ones being the ones that contain fiber. And generally, the formula for carbohydrate is your carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in those relative amounts. So when we look at carbohydrates, they are the major component of most plants, and they make up about 60 to 90% of their dry weight. And when in contrast, we look at, animal-based food products, they only contain a small amount of carbs. And plants make their own carbohydrate basically, as you know, from the process called photosynthesis, where they take carbon dioxide and water and convert that to glucose and oxygen. Um, and so basically kind of using sunlight energy, and converting that energy from sunlight and into energy that is kind of stored into carbs. And so the plant uses these carbohydrates to grow and to be healthy. And because animals are incapable of photosynthesis, therefore they kind of depend on plants as a source of carbohydrates. So take, for example, your plant-based products, your wheat, your broccoli, they supply most of our carbohydrates in our diet. And to some extent, milk also does contain some carbohydrates. So what is the function of carbohydrates? Like I mentioned, it's the primary energy source for the body, and it contributes to about, remember we talked about this in the first lecture, 4K calories per gram. And, our brain and nerve cells almost completely rely on sugar for glucose for energy. And basically, if you look at the MyPlate diet, 45 to 65% of our K calories come from carbohydrate. And basically, in terms of energy needs as well, our cells can burn protein and fat for energy, but we will always use glucose first, in part because glucose is the most energy efficient source. And the brain and other nerve cells are really picky about their food, and under most circumstances, glucose is used first. But our body can also store excess glucose in the form of glycogen, and that's where we have our constant available source. And glycogen can be stored in both the liver and the muscles. So when your blood sugar dips, basically, and when we need energy, the liver will convert that glycogen into glucose and then deliver that into the bloodstream. So muscle glycogen does not supply glucose in the bloodstream, but is strictly to supply energy when we can exercise. So if you're running and you run out of you run out of glycogen and you're not eating carbohydrates, then the body will start breaking down your protein in your muscles to some extent. And then protein can be converted to glucose. okay, to help maintain your glucose levels in the blood. And basically as well, your carbohydrate as much as possible will try to spare protein from being burned for energy. And so that the protein can be used for, repair and for building. So an inadequate supply of carbohydrate can cause the body to convert some of this fat to glucose, but, then it's not desirable. So, using protein, using fat is it can be harmful to the body because when fat is burned for energy without any carbohydrates present, basically they produce ketone bodies. And these ketone bodies can be used by the brain for energy, but too many times can cause the blood to become, acidic. So we call that ketosis. And that kind of interferes with the transportation of oxygen in the blood. And it can also cause like severe dehydration and also lead to a fatal coma. So it's kind of very, very important that, we do not use fat or try to use fat as efficiently as possible. Similarly as well, we need, for various kinds of physical activities like, walking, moderate and intense, walking, cycling, swimming, we see that the amount of carbohydrate kind of increases with the type of activities that we're doing. And like I mentioned, it's not just your cartilage, but we also use carbohydrate for your hormones, enzymes, and genetic material. So basically, as you see over here, we need about 130 grams of carbohydrate to kind of prevent protein and fat from being burned. We also have another thing, another form of carbohydrates, which is your fibers. And fibers, they really do a lot. And we are going to be looking more into this, but basically they help with, normal functioning of the intestinal tracts. They help to lower blood cholesterol, blood pressure, reduce risk of developing type 2 diabetes, and it also helps to keep your body weight at a more, prevent you from gaining weight, and also kind of helps with, promoting regularity. So when we look at this and we can look at the different types of carbohydrates, we can break it down into two categories, which is the simple and complex. But basically, we're going to look into the simple category first, which is also known as your sugars. Your complex is known as your polysaccharides. So when we look at simple, we know that they can be divided into both your monosaccharides, which is the simplest building blocks of your carbohydrates, or your disaccharides, which consists of two monosaccharides. And as you can see over here, your monosaccharides are basically your glucose, fructose, and galactose, whereas your disaccharide consists a combination of glucose and fructose for sucrose, or glucose and glucose for maltose, and for your lactose, glucose galactose. And I will explain this now. So monosaccharides, building blocks for carbohydrates, and it's almost exclusively found in your plant food. But you can also find them in your candy, your cakes, your cereals, okay? Your sugary products. And your disaccharides basically is just a combination of these two monosaccharides, and they form these double sugars, which are your sucrose, maltose, and lactose. And and basically when we look at your monosaccharides and the structure, so we can start off with glucose, and glucose is the most abundant in nature. Okay, this is where we use our body, our main source of our energy comes from, and it affects our blood glucose levels, and it's part of our fuel for the functions of our various cells. And we can find it a lot in fruits, honey, plant-based food. Okay, for fructose, on the other hand, fructose is the sweetest natural sugar, and we can metabolize, it can be metabolized to glucose and fat in the liver, particularly when we talk, and I'm going to be going a little bit deeper into this about high fructose corn syrup. So naturally, it's present in fruits and honeys, but you can also find it in sweeteners, in your soda, in your candy. And this whole entire rise of concentrated sugars, because we have been consuming more of these added sugars in the form of fructose since the 1970s, and it has become prevalent in the Western diets. And there are a lot of health consequences of, consuming too much fructose. And we can see that, amount of fructose, from 5 to 30 grams have kind of increased to about 75 to 150 grams daily, on a worldwide basis. And the domino effect that it has on the liver, on, hypertension, on heart disease, and kidney disease, which we'll look in a little bit later. And then we also have galactose, and galactose basically is just linked to it's part of your sugars in your milk, okay, and it's found in dairy products. It's not very sweet, but it too can be converted to glucose. I do not need you to memorize the structure. I just kind of put it there for your own knowledge. The next thing we have is your disaccharide. And disaccharides, basically, like I said, it's like, two glucose molecules, or it's a glucose and a fructose, or it's a glucose and a galactose. And so for your maltose, basically, they're kind of connected and linked together through a condensation reaction where you see there's a loss of water. But again, you do not need to know this, all right? So basically, it's found in seeds and alcoholic beverages because you can see sugar from germinating grains, which is basically your beer production. For sucrose, actually, they're one of the most sweetest and the least expensive sugars, and they're found in your table sugar, your sugar cane, maple tree sap, and it consists of one molecule of glucose, one molecule of fructose. Lactose, on the other hand, it's a glucose of one molecule of glucose and galactose, and they are basically found in your milk and your milk products. So I do kind of need you to know the combinations of whether it's a glucose and fructose, is it glucose and glucose, or is it a glucose and a galactose? And when we have these disaccharides, basically the body, has to kind of digest it in the most simplest forms. And so our digestive enzymes in our intestines will kind of break down these disaccharides into simple monosaccharides, and then they're absorbed in the bloodstream for energy distribution. And so as you can see, for sucrose, we have the sucrase enzyme. For lactose, we have the lactase enzyme. And for maltose, we have the maltase enzyme. And that will kind of break it down into their individual units of glucose, fructose, galactose, which are your monosaccharides. So now we'll go into what is this naturally occurring sugars and added sugars. So naturally occurring sugars, you can find them in your fruits, your 100% real juices, and this food generally have a lot of they have sugars, but the sugars comes with your vitamins, your minerals, and your fibers. So you get some nutrition from your sugar calories, but also with naturally occurring sugars in whole fruits, you don't get the huge concentrated amounts, okay? So when it comes to simple sugars, smaller amounts are physiologically desirable. And when you're eating a piece of fruit, whatever sugars that are present in a piece of fruit is more slowly digested and absorbed into your bloodstream because the fiber in the fruit kind of slows down that digestion and absorption of the fruit. And this is what is desirable, that slower absorption. But if you're kind of talking about added sugars, they are basically found in your candy, your soda, your cakes, and they contain they have very few vitamins and minerals and basically no fiber at all. So you're not getting any nutrients from this, as you can see, no fibers, okay, very, very little. And so basically, you are consuming sugar calories, but not getting any nutrients with those sugar calories. And one more thing to kind of add on is that they tend to have huge peak doses and they're kind of rapidly absorbed in the bloodstream and they spike your blood sugar. So not physiologically desirable, and they have very, very, very few nutrients, but they provide a lot of calories. So they are not nutrient dense, as we kind of discussed that in chapter 1. So when we kind of look at sugars in your nutritional fact panel, we have to keep in mind that the number of grams given includes naturally occurring sugars and also your added sugars. And your body kind of processes these different types of sugars differently, okay? So for example, fructose in an apple and high fructose corn syrup in soda. There are many natural sugars that come together with apple, okay? They contain fiber and that kind of helps slow down digestion, and glucose absorption, okay, but we'll be discussing that a little bit more. But when we talk about added sugars, we see that, it's just a lot of, different kinds of sugars. And I want you to remember that, for example, over here, we see 4 grams of sugars. And 4 grams of sugars basically correspond to 1 teaspoon, okay? So if you're kind of looking at the amount of sugars that is present over here, 26 grams, okay? How much of that in teaspoons? We just take 26 divided by 4, and we get that in teaspoons, okay? So these sugars are basically all monosaccharides and disaccharides, okay? They do not contain your fiber or anything like that. So please remember this calculation. If I asked you there's 20 grams of sugar that is present in this food, how many teaspoons of sugar? Basically, you just kind of divide that by 4 and you will get the amount of teaspoons. So what is the main function of sugars? Why do we have a lot of sugars in our food? But basically, as I mentioned in the first lecture, we tend to prefer food that's high in salt, high in sugar, high in fat. And so the main function is to sweeten food. And we kind of use that for preservation because we know, especially in jam and jellies, we want to balance the acidity. Okay. We use that for browning the crust. Okay. Helps to retain the moisture in baked goods so it stays fresh. It also keeps it moist and tender. And it also kind of helps with, the yeast, the action of yeast in your bread, in making bread. But you kind of remember when you look at your nutrition facts labels, there are about 75 different names of sugar. For example, we can see here cane sugar, maltose, mannose, maple syrup, rice syrup, syrup, brown sugar, barley malt, beet sugar. And a lot of these times, when you look at nutritional food labels, they just don't put sugars there. They put multiple names of these ingredients, and they are basic. A lot of these are actually basic sugars, and so it's kind of it is not important for you to memorize all these different names, but kind of know that, wow, when you look at a nutrition facts label, and sometimes you see dextrose, you see maltose, and then you see treacle, and maybe you see contractinate. These are all your sugars that are kind of added into your baked goods. So for example, if we look at this, let me just remove this annotate. Okay. So if we look at the ingredients for cereals and ingredients for soda, and we see here whole grain, whole wheat, sugar, brown sugar syrup, dextrose, all of these are basically your sugar. And we can identify we have sugar inward, sugar, corn syrup, you know, the amount of sugar that's kind of been added into your cereal. For example, for your soda, on the other hand, we have, sugar, corn syrup, brown sugar syrup, brown sugar, barley malt syrup. All of these are just your ingredients that are kind of being used for your baked goods, for your soda, for your cereals. All of this actually contains, they just use different names, but they are basically just your sugars, okay? For example, it's particularly when we talk about soda, you see what high fructose corn syrup, okay, inside, and that is particularly what is driving that obesity epidemic, in a lot of these developed nations. So I just want to kind of show you the global consumption of sugar currently, and just to kind of give you that sense of human sugar intake, And for centuries and up to 1700s, human consumes less than 4 pounds of sugar per year. And remember that sugar is a disaccharide and it contains of, glucose and fructose kind of linked together. And so when we kind of look at it, 4 pounds per year, it's basically 5 grams of sugar per day. And when we look at what sugar is, it's basically 50% glucose, 50% fructose. That means about 2.5 grams of fructose. But if we kind of flash forward to, 100 years later, and we see we are well beyond that 100 pounds of sugar, right? We see globally 109 or 166 pounds. More than 65 countries are consuming more than 100 grams of sugar. But what is the recommended intake? 50 grams or less than 10, about 10 teaspoons. And basically you can see the sugar content in your different kinds of food. And about 100 pounds a year, that's about 123 grams, I mean, we're talking about more than 100 grams a day. And half of it, which is about fructose, it can be anywhere. Let's say we're looking at the United States, 166 grams. Basically, half of that is about 100 and about, people here are basically consuming more than in terms of half glucose, half fructose, they're consuming about 83 grams of fructose per day. And when you start starting to consume more than 40 to 50 grams of fructose per day, that's when you start to see a lot more health effects, which we will discuss as we go on to the later slides. So where's all this added sugar basically coming from? And this is where I got this information from the Tufts University Nutrition Letter. And we can see that basically most of this is coming to you from your beverage, your sugar sweetened beverage, okay? And like your coffee, sweetened tea, your sodas, your energy drinks, your food drinks. And soda leads for teens and adults. Fruit juices kind of leads for your young kids. And fruit juices, natural sugars, aren't basically counted in your dietary guidelines. And also the FDA kind of asks people to limit the amount of added sugar to kind of track. And that's why reading your food labels are very, very, very important. And a lot of these added sugars basically kind of come from your high fructose corn syrup because it's being widely available, and it's kind of started out in the 1970s and kind of led to that increased intake. And ultimately, when we look at the high intake of your sugar sweetened beverage, which is your SSB over here, sugar sweetened beverage, you see that it comes together with a higher risk of various kinds of diseases. But the one good thing that I could say, in the past recent years, I think since 2020, there has been actually a slow reduction of the amount of high fructose corn syrup that people are consuming. And so, what is this high fructose corn syrup? Basically, it started out in the 1970s, and we used that to kind of sweeten, many different kinds of processed food, soft drinks, fruit punches, pastries. And it's been used as a caloric sweetener, okay, in more than 40% of food and beverages and virtually all soft drinks. So it's basically kind of produced from milling corn, to produce your cornstarch. Then you kind of process that cornstarch to yield that corn syrup, which is entirely glucose. And then by using an enzymatic process, basically convert that glucose into fructose, okay? You don't need to know the whole entire process, but basically that's how it's made. It's just milled from corn, to produce cornstarch, and then kind of change over to when you process that cornstarch, you get that corn syrup, and then you add an enzyme, it converts the glucose into fructose. And when we kind of look at this, the look at all these kinds of foods, for centuries, especially, when we start, hunter-gatherers lifestyle, start advent of agriculture, we see that a lot of our diets come from fruits and, some milk products, and those kind of things make up that simple sugars, okay, that naturally occurring sugars. So, basically, but then we kind of shifted over to, taking a lot more desserts. We are taking a lot more, consuming a lot more, baked goods, a lot more soda, and you look at the fructose content, basically in your like your Whole Foods, 5, 7, 3, yogurt's basically 0, 1 cup of yogurt. But when we look at, your sodas, your cereal, your Pop Tarts and everything, and we look at the amount of fructose, uh, you know, for much of human history, you might see maybe 12 to maybe 20, 25 grams of fructose daily, not zero fructose. Because like I said, remember that in most of the time we are packing away huge amounts of simple sugar of fructose in that way with the kind of diets that the early populations used to have. And now we look at the right side, and let's say you're having Fruity Pebbles for breakfast, then you have milk, and then you have a Mountain Dew, and then you have dessert for lunch, maybe cake or cookie, and then maybe later on you have a soft drink, and then you have another kind of dessert for dinner. It's easily coming up to that 100 grams of sugar, 160 grams of sugar per day. And you remember half of it is basically your fructose, and that comes up to about, anywhere from about 60, 90 to around 90. And you can see that Mountain Dew basically, the total amount of sugar, 77 grams, and 36 grams is coming from your fructose. It's really, really huge amounts that we have not been consuming. Basically, just drinking that Mountain Dew is similarly to what people used to consume, less than 25 grams, anywhere from about 15 to 25 grams of fructose daily to about 36 grams of fructose. And you're probably not just going to have a Mountain Dew. You're probably going to be eating a lot of different things, and they too contain fructose. So kind of just bear that in mind. Again, you don't have to memorize this, but kind of like, okay, this is the amount of fructose that, the increased amount of fructose that people are consuming. So why is it I'm spending a lot of time on fructose is because, how our body kind of how does different kind of sugars affect us. So when we eat solid sugars, containing foods, our bodies kind of register those calories. So we go about when we go about eating these solid sugars, they are generally less harmful because we do not register those calories, okay? And we do not, but when we talk about liquid sugars, we can overconsume that. Okay, it's easier to overconsume because it's dissolved in water, syrups. And when you consume that, it causes huge spike in your blood sugar, and it's kind of linked together with your various kinds of non-communicable diseases. But our solid sugar, on the other hand, it takes a longer time for it to dissolve and absorb, and provides more of a satiety. And they also contain some trace minerals, not not that much. You have to eat a lot to be able to get the trace minerals, but at least they contain that as compared to your liquid sugar. Okay. And liquid sugar is always kind of known to be associated with your weight gain. And so you want to be mindful of liquid sugars in your sodas, your juices, and your sweetened coffees. So like I mentioned, we see just the amount of fructose that, is inside your food. And, those amount, how much you're consuming really does matter, because when we look at the research to kind of show when people consume more than 50 grams of sugars, there's adverse metabolic effects. And we can see here, that increased blood uric acid levels. Okay. It can cause hypertension. It can also cause, metabolic syndromes, like you can see, your PCOS, your heart disease, dementia, insulin resistance. And we also see that, that cardiovascular disease. And uric acid, is a very, very, very painful disease. Okay. And the main cause is just kind of, drinking a lot of beverages sweetened with um your various kinds of sweeteners. And it can cause your cells to break down, and it can cause gout. And like I said, it causes damage to your joints and tissues if it builds up too much, and it's a really very, very painful disease. So we want to kind of control the amount of fructose that we are consuming, making sure that it's less than 50 grams per day. And to kind of like continue on, we know that sugar as well, that dental caries, and it really does affect people's oral health, because dental cavities are caused by that sugar intake. And it's not just amount of sugar, your white bread and your crackers. So you have bacteria and bacteria and germs in your mouth, but then together with these sugars that you consume, it produces acid. Okay, and it can cause erosion in your surface of your tooth, because this bacteria kind of metabolize your sugars, especially when we talk about sticky and gummy food, and that really does promote that dental caries. So of course, we've seen that, sticky food like gummy bears, they add that sugar that clings to your teeth, so it does more damage. And if you're eating a lot more, how frequently you're eating. So let's say, if you're a toddler and you eat small bits of foods frequently throughout the day, that is also a lot worse, because than just having two sweets a day. It's better to kind of just, do not graze the whole entire day, but just to have, limited amounts. And one thing as well, when we talk about, kind of like preventing dental caries, we've seen that fluoridated water and toothpaste really does help. One thing to kind of note, especially when we talk about having young kids, it's that baby bottle syndrome, where, where you put babies down for a nap or to get them to sleep, and you give them that bottle, and it's either diluted with fruit juice or formula or even breast milk. And all of these three things have sugar present. Okay. And these sugars are basically inside the baby's mouth for hours, and the bacteria go crazy, and they can decay that baby teeth. And of course, baby teeth is going to be replaced by adult teeth, permanent teeth. But it's very important for babies to have healthy baby teeth, so that they can, properly chew, and help and to also kind of like help them with the digestion. So it's advisable, and the American Dental Association and American Pediatric Association also warn against putting a baby down with a bottle. So that's just something on an extra note to kind of remind people, if you have kids, do not allow them to take a bottle when they go to sleep. Another thing is that, whether is it a fact or a myth, sugar and hyperactivity. It's widely believed to kind of say that high sugar causes ADHD in kids, but research has shown that that is not true. Okay. Basically there is, there are many, many different kinds of factors, like sleep, anxiety, that can contribute to hyperactivity. And, and sometimes as well, we can look at the placebo effect, where parents, expecting sugar to affect their child's behavior, may unconsciously misinterpret their actions, and leading to biased observation. And also, children react differently, okay, to sugars. So you might see slight energy spikes, but others there are no noticeable changes. But a lot of these factors are kind of due to temperament, emotional disturbance, sleeping problems, and there's no link between sugar and hyperactivity. So to kind of like look towards the last part, what is your sugar intake? So the dietary guidelines have actually mentioned that we should consume about 10% of our calorie intake from added sugars, 10%, okay? And maximum, 50 grams of sugars, and that's 12.5 teaspoons, okay? And if you exceed that limit, basically you're going to be deficient in essential nutrients, which is needed for growth and development. But if we look at the dietary guidelines, they are a little bit more lenient. For the American Heart Association, basically, it's only 100 calories for sugar for women, 150 cal of added sugar for men. So if you kind of look at the amount of sugar that a person is consuming is 17 teaspoons, on average. But at the maximum level with the dietary guidelines, which is a lot more lenient, it's about 12.5 teaspoons. So we see just that huge amount of sugar intake among the average population, among, an average American. And so, what can we do to kind of reduce that sugar intake? And so, basically prepare your own food, low sugar recipes, and with our taste buds, we can basically, at first, if you consume a lot of sugar, it will take some time for you to adapt, but basically it's adaptable. So, you kind of slowly reduce the amount of sugar gradually until we decrease it by 1/3 or more. You can also, add less sugar to your coffee, tea, cereal. Instead of drinking sodas, drink water. And also, one good thing is whenever, for me personally, I don't add sugars in any of my food, even though it calls for, unless of course I'm baking. But, if you want that sweetness, you can get it from your various kinds of spices. So kind of modifying your different kind of recipes by using different kinds of spices can really help to give you that sugar kick that you might need. So there are a lot of different ways, and also kind of reading your food labels, because you need to kind of look at how much sugar, and a lot of the food that processed food over here in America is just filled with huge amounts of uh sugar. So make sure that you choose wisely, cut out your sugars, more balanced, rich, whole food, look at more naturally occurring sugars, and pay attention to your food labels. So instead of, going for candies, go for your fruits and your vegetables. And to kind of end this, we kind of look at fake, whether is it a fact or whether is it fake. And I have this whole entire website for you to go through and reading material about artificial sweeteners, okay? And a lot of times people have seen that artificial sweeteners can cause cancer, but actually there's no evidence at all. And, and if you say that you do not consume artificial sweeteners are in a lot of your foods that you have, even in your toothpastes as well. So, there's no, you have, the only way to be properly informed is to kind of read your food labels. So with that, I will end here and we will continue on with the next part shortly.